path forward on tax reform. President Trump urging House lawmakers to adopt the Senate's budget this week in order to get that tax bill moving ahead and passed before the end of the year. The president also suggesting during a conference call with House lawmakers that they refer to the effort as tax cuts rather than tax reform, a message that the president himself referred to during an exclusive interview with Maria Bartiromo.
I call it tax cuts. It is tax reform also, but I call it tax cuts. It'll be the biggest cuts ever in the history of this country. And I think that there's tremendous appetite, there's tremendous spirit for it. I think that we're going to have the votes for taxes. And I will say the fact that health care is so difficult, I think makes the taxes easier. The Republicans want to get it done.
They can't get this tax bill done this year. Should they forego Thanksgiving and Christmas? Should they be here if they don't have a bill on your desk by Thanksgiving?
Well, I think they should, and I think they will. I think a lot of things are happening, unless you know it's going to be right after that. But I don't even like them leaving. But I will say this. I want to get it by the end of the year, but I'd be very disappointed if it took that long. It could be substantially less than that, depending on what happens when we send the bill back to the House. You know, they'll send it back, and if people are going to go and, you know, make 200 suggestions as opposed to maybe no suggestions, because it's a great bill. It's going to be a great bill.
Paul Ryan did an interview and said you are insisting that they have a fourth bracket. It's on your insistence that they have a fourth bracket. I know that you're very focused on the middle class, but do you want to raise taxes on the rich with a fourth bracket?
Well, he really said that on the basis that I wanted it or was thinking about it because I want to make sure the middle class gets taken care of. So in that way, yes. But actually, we do have four brackets because we have a zero bracket. And people aren't including that, so that would actually make it a fifth bracket. I think that when Paul says that, and we may not have that, but I would rather do that than do anything to hurt the middle class.
Scott, I want to get your reaction first and foremost to the idea that there is could be a higher bracket for potential. I'm going to just say millionaires, like a wealth surtax, and the timeline that the president's talking about.
Yeah, well, a lot of controversy or question marks around that fourth bracket, which, listen, probably wouldn't totally change, at least completely change the scope of everything. The timeline, gosh, I mean, okay, Christmas, okay, Thanksgiving is probably out. Christmas, which is really crazy considering that we were talking about August when Steve Mnuchin talked to our very own Neil Cavuno back in March. We were going to be doing this potentially after the president gave his first address back in February, that this was going to be done in March. So to me, if they get it done by the end of the year, that's going to be a miracle because I still believe there's a lot of work left to be done here, and the fact that at least so far, he talks about Rand Paul and he talks about the votes. To me, I don't feel like we have them all yet. I mean,
well, he brought up Rand Paul because Rand Paul didn't vote for the Senate.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things, Dagan, where to me there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's great to shoot for Thanksgiving or Christmas, but in reality, it's probably a 2018 deal.
When you listen to President Trump, though, because one of the big talking points among Democrats on Capitol Hill in Washington is about this is a handout for the very wealthy. That's actually not the language that you get from President Trump. He seems to be, I would interpret, okay with a higher, like an even higher bracket above 35% for his rich friends, and he keeps talking about middle class, middle class, middle class, middle class.
Here's what I would say. I like that. I know everyone will be surprised that I start with I like that. But I like that he was admitting that it's a tax cut. It is not tax reform. We've been saying this for months. This is just a tax cut. There is no tax reform happening. It's if the budget continues and they use a continuing resolution, it will be a $1.5 trillion tax cut. To Scott's point, it is a lot larger than $1.5 trillion. Okay, based on the current, whatever the current framework you want to look at. So to get from wherever it is, $2.5 trillion to $5 trillion, back to $1.5 trillion, there's going to have to be incredible negotiations going on. Also, you still have some fiscal hawks on the Republican side.
Yep.
And they're asking for either pay-go or revenue neutrality. And let's just say that there's a lot of jockeying to do between now and whenever it gets passed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, when the president was talking about how tax reform would be easier, I was thinking, you know, it's been over my lifetime that they haven't, you know, done tax reform. What's really interesting here, too, is I do think they've learned a lot of lessons from the healthcare battle, knowing how hard this is. But to your point, there are so many stakeholders here in the tax reform, tax cuts debate that'll make this more complicated. And, but I do think that Republicans in Congress are certainly feeling this pressure. I mean, if they cannot deliver on this signature item that it's become because they weren't able to get health care done, this puts all the more pressure on them. And I think the president is kind of saying that they will be the ones to be blamed next year because they'll be on the ballot.
And I also think that, they were using the words of John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan often. Well, look what they both did. John F. Kennedy did it when it was 90% rates.
Which so few people paid, though. So few people paid that rate.
But it was 90%, and Ronald Reagan was at 70%. We're at 39.5%. Yes, we need taxes to go down, but that being said, it's a lot different today than it was.
I will argue why it is not. It is similar on the corporate side because corporations, because we always focus on the individual tax cuts, and maybe that's where you don't get this giant
tax reform now and do personal in 18.
Right, which
is a much more bipartisan issue.
Steve Moore, who works for you, said before the inauguration this year that get corporate tax reform done because you see the 35% rate for corporations, the industrialized.
They could pass a bipartisan business tax reform. Okay, before year end, not personal.
Something Douglas Holtz-Aiken said on the show on Friday, that it's important to remind people half of business income is taxed on individual returns at that pass-through rate. That's why that pass-through rate has to come down below what individuals pay. One thing I'm going to throw out there, and we'll talk about it later in the show, but there's discussion about revenue raisers, about basically dramatically cutting the amount of money you can contribute to a 401k plan. And we're talking about $18,000 to $2,400. You want to talk about the market blowing up in somebody's face? That's exactly what's going to happen if they do that.
One of the biggest boosts to the stock market in history was the creation of the IRA and the 401k.
Thank you. So I want to send that message to the Republicans talking about that on Capitol Hill. Meantime,